It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast here, and it is presented by FantasyPoints.com. Your one-stop shop for any and all fantasy information you could ever need. Just make sure that you use the code FEAST, F-E-A-S-T, when you go to FantasyPoints.com. That is where my guy Joe Dolan owns and operates the best website out there for fantasy information. You can see Joe waving to you. If you check out our YouTube page over at youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, he's got his fantasy points hat on. He looks awesome. He's at FG_Dolan on Twitter. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and everything. I mentioned the YouTube page already. You should definitely follow at Ross Tucker Pod, because anytime any of our shows are posted, that's the first place you know. And because it will have the highlight clips of all of our different shows that we produce here on the Ross Tucker Podcast Network. Joe, there is no time to dilly-dally. It's week 8 already, man. We're getting closer and closer to the playoffs. The playoffs will be here before you know it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. The fantasy playoffs especially. I mean, some fantasy playoffs start as early in some high-stakes leagues as week 12. So we are really into nut cutting time right now. I mean, it's unbelievable. Even in some of your shallower leagues, we are basically halfway through the fantasy regular season. So there is right now you're at the point of the season where you're starting to consider how I have all this fab left. When am I going to spend it? You know, like you might be like, well, I don't want to spend $30 on Rashard Higgins, but if you have your full budget left, you might have to spend $30 on Rashard Higgins. There might not be good options coming down the pike here at this point. And, you know, who knows what's going to happen. And it's a crazy year as is. I'm just glad we've gotten to this point right now.
Good point there, Joe. Let's dive into it. We'll start Thursday night with the Carolina Panthers and DJ Moore. Wow. Against the Atlanta Falcons.
Mm-hmm. DJ Moore with a couple of big plays. The targets are still down a little bit, which is a concern for me. But, you know, the wide receiver group here with Carolina, Anderson and Moore. Anderson's been a little bit quieter of late. I think it's a great matchup against Atlanta. Digging through some quotes, Raheem Morris was really upset with the defense across the middle against the Detroit Lions last week, and we know what happened in that game. There's no need to rehash it. Ross, just as an aside, I guess I will rehash it. As an aside, I had never seen the shouldn't score a TD but do anyway hurt a team before this past weekend, and I saw it twice. I saw it on Saturday with Penn State, and then I saw it with the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday. So I understand, you always understand that situation, but you always realize it's a super low outcome probability anyway. But unfortunately, it hit twice for those two teams. And I guess for Atlanta, it's not that surprising that they found another unbelievable way to lose. But Raheem Morris was worried about his defense across the middle, and that's where I think Robbie Anderson really comes in. Robbie Anderson had 8 targets across the middle against the Falcons the last time out, according to Sports Info Solutions, and he had 12 targets in that game total. He had over 100 yards receiving. So I think this is a good week for Robbie Anderson. The elephant in the room is, what is the availability of Christian McCaffrey? And by the time you listen to this, we might have a clear picture of that. They're not going to make him a game time decision, I don't think. I don't think they're going to come into this and see, we're going to see how he's doing on Thursday after having him on IR for 6 weeks. I don't think that's going to happen. My gut is still that they're going to hold him out until week 9. My gut might be wrong. I woke up nauseous today, so maybe that's not a good thing. But my gut might be wrong, but my guess is they'll hold them out to week 9. They are not going to be done with this thing. Matt Rule is very deliberate. He understands the process. They are not going to rush Christian McCaffrey back to try to get a cheap win. I don't think that's going to happen. If he doesn't go, Mike Davis is viable. If he does go, you have to play McCaffrey, and I don't think Davis is anything more than a low-end flex play.
Interesting. All right, Joe. What about on the other side for the Atlanta Falcons?
Well, they're going to have to keep throwing the football. The defense, it gives up a lot of yardage. One thing I've been reading a lot about is how Matt Ryan and Hayden Hurst have both been talking about how they've gotten on the same page. And Hayden Hurst is now starting to separate himself a little bit in that mid-tier of tight end. You're always trying to decide between these guys each and every week. Oh, should I play Hayden Hurst or Robert Tonyan? Should I play? Well, I guess Gronk has graduated from that tier as well. Should I play Eric Ebron or TJ Hawkinson? All those questions, I think Hurst is starting to graduate a little bit out of that tier. So I like him a lot as a tight end one, reading all the quotes. And obviously with Carolina's passing defense, Rasul Douglas is still on the COVID list as of early Wednesday. This is a really good week for the wide receivers, Julio and Calvin Ridley and Matt Ryan. It's a good week for him. Believe it or not, I think a lot of points can be scored in this game. You don't always anticipate that on Thursday Night Football, but this, even though it was a low-scoring game last time out, 23-16, Julio has been a Panthers killer in his career. I expect this game to be pretty damn high scoring on Thursday night. I would start all my Falcons, including Todd Gurley, who, though he doesn't look great to me, continues to score touchdowns even when he shouldn't.
I am very curious to get your thoughts on the Steelers and the Ravens. Ravens coming off a bye, Steelers coming off a game that really wasn't as close as the score indicated against Tennessee.
Well, here's the thing about Baltimore, and let's start with them. We talked about the Lions heading into last week and how they had done some self-scouting over the bye and decided to get DeAndre Swift the football a little bit more. One of the hypotheticals I threw out on my Twitter account a couple of weeks ago was how if you told me through 6 weeks of the NFL season in August that J.K. Dobbins would lead the Ravens backfield in fantasy points, I would have drafted him in the second round. But he's RB 40. They are getting their offense is missing something. There is just something that's not happening. And, I know Greg Cosell has postulated that Greg Roman might have wanted to increase the passing game concepts and really start to put more on Lamar Jackson's plate. And they're trying to do that while not having the full off season and, not having as much in-person contact as you would in a typical year. And I wonder if they're going to start to transition back to some of the things that worked last year. Heavy run game. It's just shocking to me how few players have been productive on this team for fantasy. Lamar's been a good QB1, but not an elite one. The backfield's been useless. Hollywood Brown and Lamar, Hollywood's been a wide receiver 3, but they can't get on the same page. And Mark Andrews hasn't been as productive as you would like. So I want to see if they do some self-scouting over the bye, try to narrow things down into what they do well, try to see if they start to distill down that backfield rotation so somebody is able to get into a rhythm. But it doesn't seem like anybody's getting into a rhythm for Baltimore. And unfortunately for them, this is a really tough matchup coming out of the bye.
Yeah, what about on the other side with the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Have to keep an eye on the status of Deontay Johnson, but Ben Roethlisberger just looks for him when he's on the field. That's a fact. 15 targets this past week. We'll see what that ankle injury, what he says about that with Tennessee of the game last week. He came out of it and said, it's an ankle bruise, I'm fine. Ross, you know well that players always seem to be a little bit more optimistic about their injuries than coaches and trainers are. So keep an eye on Deontay Johnson's status. Juju Smith-Schuster showed some signs of life. If Deontay Johnson is active, not great news for Chase Claypool. I think had one catch for -1 yard in that game. So keep an eye on him because I think he's far more viable if Deontay Johnson does not play. It was clear that Chase Claypool was hurt by the presence of Deontay Johnson more so than Juju Smith-Schuster was. So just look at the numbers of that game. Ben Roethlisberger, low-end quarterback starter this week in a very tough matchup. And also James Conner, you just have to keep rolling with him. He's been a rock-solid RB2.
We'll keep it moving and get to the LA Chargers against the Miami Dolphins. I remember last week, Joe, you said for the Dolphins, Tua is not good for fantasy football. So what does that mean for people that have Devontae Parker and some of these guys on their teams? Yeah,
so this is just my assumption based on my knowledge of Tua's skill set. Tua to me is a deliberate I don't view him as a gunslinger the way I view Ryan Fitzpatrick or even another rookie like Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow. I view him as a kind of a deliberate, a methodical passer in the style of a Drew Brees, in the style of a Teddy Bridgewater. That's kind of how I view him. Again, it doesn't mean he's not going to be better than Bridgewater, and it sure as hell doesn't mean he's a future Hall of Famer just yet. But you have to look back to that Miami offense last year and how Ryan Fitzpatrick unlocked the production of guys like Gesicki and Devontae Parker and Preston Williams. He unlocked that production from those guys. And, you look at the quotes, Ryan Fitzpatrick was heartbroken about this move, and I'm sure he'll accept it like a good soldier. But he thought he was playing really well, and he sees a team that has a shot to go to the playoffs. So you wonder, is there going to be a fracture in that locker room a little bit? Mike Gesicki a couple weeks ago said Ryan Fitzpatrick is the best teammate I have ever had. So you can talk about how beloved he is, but also some of the young guys are probably seeing how hard Tua's working to get on the field. I want to see it first. Myles Gaskin, I think, is an RB2. He's been getting the ball a lot. You can use Parker as a wide receiver 3, but other than that, I am in wait it and see it mode here with Tua Tagovailoa and this Miami offense.
What about on the other side with the LA Rams? I might have said Chargers earlier, but the Rams coming off that Monday night performance.
I'm going to throw something out there to you, Ross. I'm presuming you watched the Monday night game just like everybody else. Doesn't it seem like this Ram offense does a lot of fancy stuff, but it struggles to go places? You look at it and you're like, man, that was a cool play call. And that was a great sequence. And it seems like they still have to put 10, 11, 12 play drives together. The offensive line is giving up pressure to Goff. And anybody on planet Earth can see Goff looks like one of the best throwers of the football in the world when he's not pressured, and one of the worst in the league when he is. It just seems like McVay, there's a disconnect there. And we talked about that with the Ravens. It seems like there's just a little bit of a disconnect with this offense. They're trying to get Reynolds and Van Jefferson involved, but it's at the expense of Kupp and Woods. They're trying to get Munt involved, and it's at the expense of Gerald Everett. Higbee was inactive in that game. Cam Akers has no role whatsoever. They're trying to get Malcolm Brown involved, and that's at the expense of Henderson and Akers. And it just seems like there's too many moving parts here. You could tell the team is well coached, but it's almost like if you watch a jam band, for instance, and you're like, there are plenty of people who are huge fans of jam bands and Fish, but then there's also plenty of people who are like, all right, you've been playing this damn song for 25 minutes. I'm impressed with the guitar solo, but can we get on with it? And I'm kind of viewing this Ram offense like a jam band right now. It's impressive. It's technically impressive, but there's just a disconnect where they're not getting in the end zone. They're not hitting that final chord to send the crowd into a frenzy. And it's just bothering me that the production isn't there the way I think it should be.
I like it, Joe. That's a really good analogy. Really good analogy. Anything specifics for this game for any of those guys?
Well, first and foremost, I think Cam Akers is droppable. He does not have a role, and I know you want to hold on to him because of this premise of upside, which he certainly has. But we have precedent here. Sean McVay buried Darrell Henderson last year as a highly drafted rookie because he didn't trust him. There is clearly a lack of trust here with Cam Akers. The guy's like 4 snaps the last 2 weeks. Darrell Henderson is running well. Malcolm Brown is handling his role. So Henderson continues to be an RB2. Malcolm Brown is a desperation flex. I wish I could tell you that Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp were more than wide receiver 2s, but they're not at this point. And Miami's defense is probably a little bit better than you think, especially in the back end, which makes Jared Goff a mediocre quarterback this week.
What about, as we move on to the next matchup, Jets-Chiefs? I mean, the New York Jets. Are they even worthy of a fantasy discussion in any way? I guess, is Crowder back this week?
He's not practicing on Wednesday, but there's hope he's going to return to practice on Thursday, which is good news. Ross, this team is abominable. It is abominable. I mean, I just want to throw it out there right now. I know you might have to say, they're going to have to score points in this game. Probably will. Didn't matter for the Denver Broncos last week. The Chiefs blew them out. So Jamison Crowder, if he goes, you put him in your lineup as a wide receiver too. That's it. LaMichael Pirine, have him on your bench. You can play him as a flex. He's the only running back here. Keep an eye on Denzel Mims. He might have a role here in the future. But, I think, frankly, I proposed in a column on fantasypoints.com, I think the Jets should trade Darnold to Pittsburgh. Like, get a couple of picks for Darnold. You're not going to get full value for Sam Darnold. But you get a couple of picks for him, load up for whoever you're going to build around. If Trevor Lawrence refuses to play for the Jets, then Justin Fields won't. If Justin Fields refuses to play for the Jets, Trey Lance won't. They're going to have a new quarterback. They're going to have a new coach next year. Get the picks to load up around. I think they should trade Darnold. This team is a freaking disaster. Just Crowder or bust.
Okay, Chiefs. I will say this. The Jets didn't allow the Bills to score a touchdown. There were penalties and stuff, though.
Yeah.
Anything about the Jets that would give you any pause, any of the Chiefs guys?
No, and their defense is playing better. There's no doubt that the defense is the better side of the ball for the New York Jets. But the Chiefs, you play your guys. Mahomes, Edwards-Helaire, Le'Veon Bell can be a flex. I thought he looked pretty good. But, of course, you see they signed Le'Veon Bell, and then Clyde Edwards-Helaire essentially has his two best games since week one. So, maybe he got a little fire lit under him. Maybe that touchdown regression is finally advancing for him. But the problem for the Chiefs last week, Ross, was they didn't have the football. They scored on defense and they scored on special teams. And if you have Patrick Mahomes, the last thing you want is the Chiefs to be scoring on defense and scoring on special teams. But it was a snow game. Snow games are always way worse for the defense than the offense. People always just kind of tank the totals of those games. But in the snow, defenses get tired, they slip, the offenses are ahead. So I think that was just kind of an outlier game for Kansas City. You stick with the guys you've been sticking with and you play them, and I expect them to put a whooping on the New York Jets in this game.
All right, Minnesota is playing against Green Bay, and the Vikings are coming off a bye. Green Bay, I'll never get over whatever happened with Houston's defense and Devontae Adams. I don't understand that at all.
Well, one of the things that did happen, you have to point out with Houston, and I know we're not talking Houston here. Bradley Roby left that game after one snap with an injury. I'm not trying to tell you that Devontae Adams would have had 3 catches for 40 yards if Bradley Roby plays, but at least there's something there. Houston stinks anyway. But with Green Bay, the thing is, I wonder if Green Bay is going to make a move for a wide receiver at some point, because you look at what Aaron Rodgers had in that game. 13 for 196 and 2 for Devontae Adams on 16 targets. His other 7 wide receiver targets produced 2 catches, both of them by Malik Taylor. And I know, Ross, you were starting Malik Taylor in all of your fantasy leagues. So I think they still need to make a move for a wide receiver. Tonyan is in that tight end group of 8 to 16 where you kind of have to make a decision on him every week. And I want to see if Aaron Jones comes back this week, because if Aaron Jones is back, he's an RB1, you know that. If he's not back, Jamal Williams is an RB1. Jamal Williams isn't Aaron Jones, but he's a heck of a facsimile for Aaron Jones. And he did a nice job last week. You saw him. He's a fun player to watch. He has a positive attitude. He's really hard-nosed. I interviewed him a couple years ago on the radio. He's one of my favorite interviews. But he's going to produce when he comes in there. But it's a huge game for Devontae Adams. Obviously a huge game for Aaron Rodgers against this defense. The problem is, I'd love to tell you there's a second wide receiver for Green Bay that I trust. I just don't. Marquez Valdes-Scantling didn't catch a pass in that game against Houston last week, as Devontae Adams had what vacuumed up all the targets. It's Rodgers, it's Adams, it's whoever starts in that backfield, and I think you could take a shot on Robert Tonyan, and that is how you pronounce it. The Packers put out a tweet that said it is just like Funyuns. So I don't know if you're a Funyuns guy, Ross.
Tonyan, because he is a ton of fun. Let's get to the Vikings on the other side of it. Everybody's killing Kirk Cousins, maybe rightfully so, Joe, but aren't Thielen and Justin Jefferson both like top 5 wide receivers this year? Yeah,
and this is one of those beautiful, narrow fantasy teams. I know the Federalist, Alexander Madison, took a crap on everybody a couple weeks ago. The Vikings just didn't play a good game. Thielen and Jefferson have to be in your lineups. This is, I think, like Cousins has directed like 50% of his throws to them the last like 5 weeks. That's absurd. They're starting to get the tight end, Irv Smith, a little bit more involved. So if you're really hurting at tight end, you can pick up Irv Smith off the bench. They made a concerted effort against Seattle a couple of weeks ago. Irv Smith was targeted on the first 2 plays of that pass game. That is a mandate from the coaching staff saying we've got to get somebody else involved in this passing game. Hope to see Dalvin Cook back out there. If Cook goes, he's an RB1. If he doesn't go, you still have to play Madison. And I like Kirk Cousins as a streamer this week. I'm just a little bit concerned. Which of these receivers, is it Jefferson, who's been playing more outside recently, is going to catch, if any receiver, is going to catch the Jair Alexander shadow? I wonder if Alexander will selectively match up, but if they put Thielen into the slot more, don't be shocked if Thielen catches fewer snaps of coverage from Jair Alexander. I think the assumption is going to be, oh, Thielen's the one, so he's going to get the Alexander shadow. I'm not too sure about that.
You know, the next game, Joe, is actually going to be our DraftKings featured game because I'm very intrigued by it. The Indianapolis Colts off of a bye, and it felt like, maybe you're going to tell me I'm crazy, but it felt like maybe the offense figured something out against the Bengals last time out after they had that big deficit against the Detroit Lions, who I don't know what to say about them other than, you know, Kenny Golladay is outrageous. I mean, he is good. So let's break this down. The Colts are 3-point favorites in this game between 2 dome teams on the DraftKings Sportsbook app. But I'm wondering if there are people, for whether it's DFS at DraftKings or just in general, that you like in this matchup.
So this is another one of those teams, the Lions, where the numbers end up looking good at the end, but when you watch the game, it's like pulling teeth. And here is the perfect example of that game. Matthew Stafford throws for 340 on 25 of 36 passing, doesn't turn the football over. That is objectively a good game. The problem is, I think Darrell Bevell, whether it's Matt Patricia, I don't know what's going on. There is just a really bad level of sequencing the play calls here. And I'm going to point out a couple of things. Number one, DeAndre Swift has another positive game. It wasn't a breakout game like he had a couple of weeks ago, but it was another positive game for him. Meanwhile, Adrian Peterson continues to get stuffed on 3rd and short situations. Detroit in that game against Atlanta was 3 of 10 on 3rd downs. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, Peterson getting stuffed on short yardage situations. Number two, multiple times they hand the ball to Peterson on 1st and 2nd down. He picks up 5 yards. Stafford has to drop back to throw on 3rd and medium, and he gets sacked or he throws an incompletion. Just bizarre, like the insistence on feeding Peterson, and I get it. He's still an effective player, but the insistence on feeding him at the expense of the rest of your offense when Matthew Stafford is throwing the ball well is bizarre to me. And I really would hope that they get away from doing that as Swift continues to develop. Now, part of the issue might be they don't trust the secondary receiver here. We saw Golladay. Marvin Jones finally did something. He had 5 catches for 80 yards. And TJ Hawkinson made the big play at the end of the game, even though he had a boneheaded one on the final drive where he fought for like an extra half yard instead of getting out of bounds. He redeemed himself. So maybe with Marvin Jones stepping up, DeAndre Swift continuing to progress, TJ Hawkinson continuing to progress, the Detroit Lions are going to put more on the shoulders of Matthew Stafford. And I just wonder if that obsession with Peterson is because Patricia and company don't trust the defense. And in this game, they play a lot of man coverage. My question is, do the Indianapolis Colts have the receivers to really get after the Detroit Lions in this game? I'm not sure they do. T.Y. Hilton's been a disaster this year. Their best wide receiver has been like Zach Pascal, Marcus Johnson. They really don't have a whole lot on the perimeter. So I wonder if Detroit will be a little bit more aggressive in this game offensively.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. This Lions thing is fascinating. What about Joe, for the Colts?
Yeah, T.Y. Hilton's a wide receiver 3 at best. He's produced, I think, above 10 fantasy points in 2 of his last 12 games, including just once this year so far. It's not pretty. They throw a lot to the tight end. They like Trey Burton, but the problem is all 3 of their tight ends have struggled this year to stay on the field. Trey Burton, Jack Doyle, and Mo Alley-Cox. So I want to monitor the injury report there. Really, for the Colts, I think Rivers is a viable streamer this week, but the only guy I feel really comfortable about starting is Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield. And I know it's been kind of like pulling teeth with him, but they've got to get that run game going. This is a team that's perilously thin at the skill positions.
Next up, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders at the Odell Beckham Jr. list. Cleveland Browns. Going to hurt me, man. I'm 4-3 in fantasy. No Odell. I'm getting nothing from Cam Akers.
Oh, my team has been so bad.
Hurt. I just subbed out Odell and put Cole Beasley in.
By the way, I know we're not talking about Buffalo yet, but did you know Cole Beasley's on pace for 90 catches and 1,100 receiving yards?
I did from your tweet, which is why I put Cole Beasley in. Yes.
There you go. I mean, he's been freaking awesome this year. Let's go and talk about in the old. I saw Chris Berman on NFL Primetime, and he does the Raider grunt, and I think I'm getting into my 30s because I get real fired up when he does the Raider grunt. Derek Carr, I think's played all right. They just had a really bad matchup last week. That one of the reasons I'm picking Tampa Bay to go to the Super Bowl is because of that defense, and maybe it's the primary reason. That is a brutal run defense for Josh Jacobs to go against. Things open up a little bit more this week against Cleveland. You got Henry Ruggs is going to have an opportunity to make plays, and I got to admit it, Ross. I was in a bind in a league last week, and I threw Nelson Aguilar into a lineup, and he goes for 5 for 107 and a touchdown. Of course, at the end of the game, he drops 3 consecutive passes, including one that goes off his hands for an interception. But, I mean, it's always been the part about getting the ball into the hands of Aguilar has been the problem. It's not when he has the ball in his hands, and the Raiders are seeing that this year. But with Oakland, you play Darren Waller, who scored a touchdown. Jacobs is back out there in your lineup in a much easier matchup against Cleveland. Henry Ruggs, you take a shot on him as a wide receiver 3. It's just kind of a team that has a lot of pieces and not very few of them that you trust for fantasy outside of Jacobs and Waller.
Yeah, I can see on that one. What about on the other side with Cleveland?
Narrow fantasy team. It does not appear they're going to get Nick Chubb back until after the bye from the MCL. They have a week 9 bye, so they're probably gonna wait until week 10. So Kareem Hunt's in your lineup. The young tight end, one of those guys that's been a theme of this show. You throw into that tight end mid-tier, Harrison Bryant, rookie out of FAU. Scores 2 touchdowns in that game. And I want to highlight the second touchdown where they lined him up as the Z to the field and they put him in motion. And I mean, the play was specifically designed for Harrison Bryant in the red zone. That shows trust to me from Kevin Stefanski. It shows trust to me from Baker Mayfield. It shows trust that this guy is going to be a big part of their passing offense. Austin Hooper is not going to play this week with the appendectomy. He's probably not coming back till after the bye. I like Harrison Bryant quite a bit this week. Rashard Higgins, this is a guy, I liken him almost to Greg Ward with Philadelphia. Not in terms of style, but in terms of when he gets an opportunity, he produces. And the team is always looking to replace him or they're always looking to say, we can do better there. But when he goes on the field, he produces. It's like a Greg Ward or a Dontrell Inman in that kind of regard, where he's just a guy who has the view of somebody's going to bounce around the league, but when he gets an opportunity, he puts up numbers. I think you've all seen the stats. Baker Mayfield averages more yards per attempt in his career throwing to Rashard Higgins than he does to Odell Beckham. So Rashard Higgins is a premier wide receiver pickup on the waiver wire, especially because Jarvis Landry doesn't look like 100%. And if you're going deeper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, the youngster out of Michigan, who consistently underachieved at Michigan, but you wonder how much of that had to do with the terrible quarterback play that he got when he was at Michigan. He blew up the combine. Those of you in deeper dynasty keeper leagues can take a look at Donovan Peoples-Jones.
It's a good point about Harrison Bryant, and I like the Rashard Higgins analogy with Greg Ward a lot because there's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm in Fresno, California right now.
I was
Joe.
just about to wonder what your setup is there, that Ross. That looks like a nice little suite there that you're in.
It's a Spring Hill suite. And,
okay.
I got Fresno State, Colorado State tomorrow night on CBS Sports Network, and Colorado State's very proud of Rashard Higgins. You can see it in all their pamphlets and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Titans, Bengals. Let's start with the Bengals. They have officially traded Carlos Dunlap while we're recording this to the Seahawks. Your thought? I mean, they put up points. Other than that one Ravens game, Joe, they put up points every week.
Yeah, they do, and that's because of Joe Burrow. It's also because the defense isn't very good. Joe Burrow's been impressive, and I know he's not lighting the world on fire like in the way Justin Herbert is, but he has been impressive. He's a gamer, and the Bengals are doing the right thing, Ross. They are making moves because they need to use draft picks to load up that offensive line around in front of Joe Burrow. That's a problem this week. Multiple offensive line injuries, including Jonah Williams with the neck. You have to monitor that. That is not a good situation for Joe Burrow to be in, but he's a gamer. He's been producing otherwise, and this Titan defense has been one of the biggest disappointments for me. Maybe the retirement of Dean Pease had much bigger of an impact than we could have anticipated, but this Titan defense got gashed. They could not get Pittsburgh off the field on third downs last week. So there's going to be an opportunity for Cincinnati to put up numbers. In the backfield, if Joe Mixon doesn't play, you can continue to play Gio Bernard. But neither guy is better than an RB2 if Mixon does play, because the offensive line is problematic right now for this front going up against Simmons and the boys with the Titans. So that's a big-time problem for Cincinnati. It continues to kind of affect this entire offense. The thing about Cincinnati is they've finally gotten A.J. Green some targets. A.J. Green's a player to me where I like the fact that they've gotten him targets. I think they should trade him immediately because, again, the focus should be on 2021 for the Cincinnati Bengals. Get picks to help the offensive line. Get T. Higgins some experience. Just try to get as much going as possible. But if A.J. Green is there this weekend, you can play him as a wide receiver 3. Tyler Boyd showed you what he can do. We saw Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster just constantly eating up yardage across the middle against the Titans. Tyler Boyd's a wide receiver 1 this week against the Tennessee Titans.
On the other side, the Tennessee Titans against that Bengals defense that can't stop anyone and now doesn't have Carlos Dunlap, although they don't really care.
Yeah, this is a beautiful game for a bounce back for Tennessee. And, when you say bounce back for Tennessee, you realize Derrick Henry didn't have a huge game. He still had 20 carries and got in the end zone for you. Henry's going to go nuts this week. A.J. Brown's going to go nuts this week. Ryan Tannehill is going to have a big game this week. Jonnu Smith, who was targeted in the end zone a couple of times but didn't make the catch, or I think only caught 1 or 2 passes last week. I think he has a big game. And you can also think of Corey Davis as somebody that you can plug into a lineup this week. But the Titans are one of those narrow fantasy teams. We love them because most of the players you're going to consider are stars for your fantasy team.
Patriots and the Bills. At this point, Joe, do we need to have a Patriots intervention? Are they at a point where you shouldn't have any of them in your fantasy lineup?
Who do you feel good about having in your fantasy lineup right now?
Nobody.
Cam Newton looks terrible. They have no speed whatsoever on offense. The run game is just a cornucopia of mediocrity because they rotate these backs willy-nilly and they're not sustaining drives. So let's have that intervention. As of right now, there should be no New England Patriots in your fantasy lineup. I mean, I know there's going to be some situations where you're like, well, I have to play James White. Okay. I have to play Edelman. Okay. N'Keal Harry gets dinged up. He's not doing anything anyway. It is a disaster. I did not anticipate, whether it was Newton or Stidham, I did not anticipate this offense would be this bad. Once is a coincidence, 2 times is a trend. This is 2 straight weeks that offense has been abominable. I don't want Patriots anywhere near my fantasy lineup.
I'm with you. On the other side, the Bills, kind of a deceiving game for Josh Allen and some of the skill guys because they didn't get in the end zone at all.
Yeah, it was a really bizarre game. The one big issue for Buffalo, first and foremost, Josh Allen's had some accuracy issues creeping up the last couple of weeks. That's always going to be a thing with Allen. We know what his ceiling is. We know what his floor is at this point. You live in with it with Josh Allen. One of the big problems for me with Buffalo, Ross, I am stunned at how little they've been able to run the football. They just can't run it right now. And I thought, you bring in Zach Moss, Devin Singletary can be a 1-2 punch. Singletary has been very unimpressive to me. And I see Zach Moss out there last week against the Jets. He has 7 carries for 47 yards. He catches 3 passes for 25 yards. So he has 72 yards from scrimmage on 10 touches. Meanwhile, Singletary has 8 carries for 29 yards and 2 catches for 18. I think the Bills should lean more on Zach Moss going forward. And on my personal depth chart, I'd have him ahead of Devin Singletary rest of season. I just think he's probably the better option, and they need to get somebody here. We always make fun of establishing the run, but the Bills need something in that backfield. You don't need to give the ball 20 times a game to Zach Moss the way you do Derrick Henry, but you need something there. And there is that little bit missing. We'll see if John Brown is able to return. I was disappointed in Gabriel Davis catching just 1 pass in that game. But Cole Beasley, Ross, you put him in your fantasy lineup. If you separated out his numbers and didn't look at his name, you'd think, man, what a season Keenan Allen's having. I mean, that's kind of what Cole Beasley's doing right now. So he is a wide receiver too. Stephon Diggs has to be in your lineup. And obviously in this matchup, you are playing Josh Allen. The Patriots are abominable on both sides of the ball. They're better on defense, but they're bad on both sides of the football.
That'll do it for part 1 of the Fantasy Feast Eaton podcast, the show that's so nice we do it twice. Still need to break down Chargers, Broncos, Niners, Seahawks, Saints, Bears, Eagles against Ben DiNucci. My guy Ben DiNucci and the Cowboys, Bucks, Giants. Lot to get to in episode 2. It'll be in your podcast app shortly after midnight. Make sure you head over to fantasypoints.com and put the code FEAST in. It is time for the playoff push. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Feast podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and the College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.